First, I want to thank you, Professor Patrice, for having me here to speak with the group, and to Stuart, who has shared learning and teaching with me for several years, and to all of you for being here with us today, and your curiosity about decisions and how you make decisions when you don't know what's going to happen. So how many decisions do you make in a day? Do you make 100 decisions in a day, maybe 50, 1,000 decisions? So if you think of all those decisions that you make, some of them are about your students and seeing your students and what to do next with students. Sometimes it's about your patients and what to do. Sometimes it's about your colleagues. So my question about those, when you have decisions to make, oh, there we go. The question is always, what's the right answer? Don't you always want the right answer? So how often, when you have a decision to make, can you be sure what the right answer is? So you have a decision. Do you know the right answer in 50% of your decisions? No? 75%? More? No, less. 30%? Right? So still, you're wanting to find the right answer. Your colleague wants the right answer. Your students want the right answer. Your patients certainly want the right answer. And yet, how often is there really a right answer? So often, your answer has to be, it depends. It depends. It depends on this. It depends on that. It depends on the other thing. Sometimes you don't know the right answer because you don't have all the information. There's someone who does, and so you can find it out. Maybe it's in research, or maybe it's looking in the literature, or maybe it's taking some more tests to get some more data. Sometimes there's someone else who knows the right answer, but not you. So you want to find them and get the right answer. But there's some kinds of questions for which the right answer is not knowable. It doesn't matter how much information you get. It doesn't matter what research you read. That there's no particular single right answer. And those questions are called wicked problems. So a wicked problem was defined in the mid-1970s. Are you familiar with the literature about wicked problems? No, it's new. So in about the 1970s, there were urban planners in the US who thought that they could use engineering, social engineering, to answer all the questions of society. And then they realized, well, maybe not. Maybe there were some questions that would never be answered. Their favorite example was social justice. Right? Is there a right answer to social justice? No. But even if there's not an answer, that doesn't keep you from taking action. So I understand your students are taking action today. Do they know what the consequence of that action will be? No. But they still act. And so in that 75% of your decisions where you don't know what the right answer is, but you still need to act, that's the space where human systems dynamics works. In all the places where you already know how to make decisions, please do. When you have all the information you need, or you can get the information you need, you have ways to solve those questions. But with human systems dynamics, we say, well, what if you don't? What if the questions are unknowable and you still have to make decisions? And think about the times as medical people, as professionals in the medical world, how often you need to make a decision and you don't know what the consequences are going to be. As a teacher, I love teaching. I teach often, but how often do I know when I say a particular thing to a particular student? Do I know how they're going to respond? No. And the more experience I get, sometimes, the more sensitive I am and the less I can predict. When I first started to teach, I thought I could predict what people would do and what was the right thing to do. School told me what teaching should look like. But I realize as I get more experience and more sensitivity that I can't know. But what do I do? So I want to define wicked problems for you. In the 1970s, Riddle and Weber said, well, maybe there are two wicked problems, social justice and poverty. And in the 1980s, the literature came up again and said, well, maybe we have more than two. Maybe there are a dozen wicked problems. And then in the 1990s, when people asked the question about wicked problems, they said, all of our important problems are wicked problems. So we have climate change and sustainability, social justice and corruption, government that works, politics that work. All of our critical issues are wicked. And this is how we define a wicked problem. The first is that there's no root cause. So if you begin to look for a root cause, there are disagreements. Is there this root cause, or is it something else, or is it something else? And that there is no single root cause. Excuse me. That's better. So if you think about chronic illness as a wicked problem, is there a single root cause? Well, no, there's not, right? So my arthritis, which is a chronic condition, part of it's genetics, part of it is exercise, part of it is diet, part of it is something else. None of those singularly is the cause. No root cause. The second thing is that you can list lots of reasons for the issue, for the problem, and people disagree. There are many perspectives about what those reasons might be. So if I talk to a genetic analyst, he'll say, oh, it's about the DNA. If I talk to a nutritionist, he'll say she should change her diet. Talk to a physical therapist who says she should get more exercise. So different perspectives about what is the cause. And each time you say this is the cause, it gives you a path for solution, which is going to be only partial. There are lots of variables. There's none what they call a stopping condition. So if you imagine a time and a place where a chronic condition is cured, there's not a stopping condition for it. And so you learn to manage it. These are some other examples. Interprofessional practice. Is that a wicked problem? Is there a single solution? Will two interprofessional collaborations ever look exactly the same? No. Do you have to create it in every moment, in every opportunity? Yes. It's wicked in that way. There's no single solution. Social accountability is something that's coming up in conversations that we're having in medical education in South Africa and in the EU, in the UK, and in the United States, and I'm sure that you're seeing it here too. How do you take medicine into a primary care environment and find that you're having a positive effect on the community as well as your patient? And what's your responsibility in that? Another wicked problem. Chronic illness. When we talk about the social determinants of health, it means that you, as a medical professional, are working in a very complex combination, many causes, and yet you hold that space as a professional, invited to make serious decisions when you cannot possibly know what is right. So I'm going to pause here for a second and see if you have other examples of wicked problems that you run into either as teachers or as medical professionals or as members of the faculty. Other examples or questions that you might have, and Patricia will help me translate, please. Oh, very good example. Students' mental health. So is there a single cause? No. Can you ever imagine a particular one way to help students be mentally healthy? No, it's a great example. Other examples. Oh, yes, that's a very good one. That's particularly wicked, right? So as an organization development professional, I'm supposed to tell you, oh, no, it's very simple. It's very simple, but it isn't. And so you have complex issues all around you setting the conditions for your work. You have them with the groups in which you're working and the expectations. You have them in pairs. And I also have my own mental health, which is itself a wicked problem. And so all of these are places where we expect ourselves to give answers. And yet we're in situations where answers are not possible. So this is the space where we work in human systems dynamics. So what I'm going to do today is to share with you 3 practices that we use to help us make decisions in these conditions of massive uncertainty. So how do you tame wicked problems? So I just want to show you some other examples. Now, you would think that pharmaceuticals would be a pretty simple situation. And yet, with work that we're doing with big pharma, what we find is pharmaceuticals are moving more and more toward customized, individualized, DNA-driven, genetically driven drugs. And so big pharma companies are having to transform so that they're dealing with the choices of medication as a much more complex question than it was before. We also think that a simple procedure that you teach to first-year students, something very simple like giving an injection, there are times and ways in which that becomes very complex. And the sensitivity about when and how to give the injection and being concerned about the parents of the child who's receiving the injection and their religion or the social requirements that they have or how they historically and culturally deal, suddenly this very simple, easily answered issue becomes, when you are in practice, quite complex. And research. Now, we like to think that research is based on certainty, that when we design a study, we do a study, we end up with something that is true. Does any of you believe that? No. Because we know when we design a study, we use everything that we know and all the history that we have, and yet there are variables that we don't control. There are issues that we can't foresee. There are errors that enter, and research that's done in one place and time may not be applicable in another. And so all of those is issues. So even research, which is supposed to be the most certain of all, is not always. Oh, thank you. We think about finance, financial structures, and money as being predictable and structured, and it's not either. You hear any conversation with regard to national financial issues, it gets messy pretty quickly. Even building a building or finding a new building is quite complex. So thank you. When you think about the relationships between and among people who are working there and in the community, where you build and how you build and who builds, and what kind of corruption there might be in building the building, even these simple things become very complex. Do I need to say about assessment being a complex issue? Is anybody surprised by that, right? And it doesn't matter how many checklists you get, you'll never have enough checklists. This is one of the interesting things about these complex systems is usually, if you have a simple system, the more detailed you are in your analysis, the clearer and better your description is. In these complex systems, it works the opposite. That sometimes the more detail you get, the more confusing it gets. The less predictable it comes. So if you think about a whole cohort of students, whole group of students, you can kind of see where they're going to be. Yet when you begin to say, well, Joe is like this, and Janie is like this, and Patrice is like this, then suddenly the system gets very, very complex. So it's different. And finally, if you think about something like, this is about contracts. If you think about agreements, especially if you're looking at agreements in interprofessional practice? How many of you are engaged in interprofessional practice of some kind? Yeah, a few. My suspicion is that over the next few years, that's going to expand. It is in all the other parts of the world where we work. And the agreements that you begin with, and you need agreements written and clear at the beginning of a project, and yet they're never sufficient. They're always renegotiated throughout. So these are things that we expect to be predictable that aren't. Then there are other things that we know are not going to be predictable. Cancer and evolution of cancer is, in some cases, clear and predictable and treatable, and yet there are surprises in those. Personal relationships, public health, community health, teams and being able to work in teams, or sensitive family-oriented and patient-oriented, patient-centered care, and culturally sensitive care. What does that look like? So in all of these cases, you, as an instructor and as a health professional, are dealing with these unpredictable spaces. So let's talk about what you can do about it. So sometimes we call this admiring the problem, where we can spend a lot of time talking about how terrible it is, and that the problem is really a big problem. I could spend 90 minutes talking about how big this problem is. Is that going to be very useful? No. It may be true, but it's not useful. So one of the distinctions that we've made in working with a complex system is to be able to distinguish about things that are true but not useful, and things that are true and useful. So we've admired this problem enough. Let's begin to think about what we can do, even if we can't solve it, what we can do to make it better. So how can I make decisions with regard to wicked problems? Now, before we began to look at complex science, the ways people made decisions in wicked problems, you could call it intuition. Some people call it gut, right? Some people call it magic and practice. But it's not that you haven't made decisions in wicked space before. It's that you've done what seems right in that moment, in that time. But it's really hard to tell somebody else how to do that. So when you're working with a student and you can see how to respond in a wicked problem, you know because of your experience and your history, and you have an idea about what's going to be best, but they're naive. They're just beginning. They don't know what will work. And how do you share with them what your tummy, what your tummy is telling you, what your intuition is? So how do you go about that? Well, you pay attention to the dynamics of the human systems. And I'm going to show you 3 ways to do that. Now, and now you've seen them all. No, I'm going to back up again. Huh, interesting. Yeah, if you would, if you'd just go back, that'd be great, Patrice. You're back and back, and back another one. This is a preview. Back again, there we go, right there. Thanks. Yes, thank you. So in human systems dynamics, we have about 35 different models and methods and tools that we use of various kinds. And I'm just going to share these 3 with you because Stuart has said they'd probably be most useful to you. And in work that we do with medical educators around the world, they are. So the first one is about adaptive action. Now, how many of you do action research or action teaching, learning? Are you familiar with that principle? You do? Sure. This is quite closely related to that. It's a problem-solving approach that allows you to think and act as closely together as possible. So it's a 3-step process. The first step is, 2 please. The first step is to ask the question, what? What do you see? What do you know? What does the research say? What's happening? Now, notice how you do this all the time in your medical practice, in your health professions practice. You see a patient, you're thinking what? It's a diagnostic process. You're picking up data. You're looking to see. When you're teaching, you're doing the same thing. You're watching the students. You're seeing what are they thinking? What do they need? What's the place where they stand? So the first is a data collection step. The second step is, so what? So what does it mean? So what's the data? So what's the tension in the system? So where should I be focusing? So what should I be thinking about? Anybody want to guess the third step? What? So what? Now what? Now what? So the third step is now what? Given what I've seen, given the meaning I've made of it, now what am I going to do? And it's a very fast process. And people that I work with who do brain dynamics and are looking at what happens with cognition say that our bodies are optimized for this adaptive action process as well. Perceptions, what is going on, our brain processes about making meaning and how that works, and then moving into our extremities about now, what are we going to do? So it's not a coincidence that you intuitively and in all your practice have learned to do this. What, so what, now what? It's very simple. It's a learning cycle. It's a total quality cycle. It's essentially what the scientific method is. So it's not new. What is new is that it's so simple and 3 questions. So often a learning cycle is said, do this, and then do this, and then do this, and then you'll get the right answer. But when we're working in wicked problems and we don't know what's going to happen, then we have to show up with a question. What is it? So what does it mean now what's happening? And it happens very quickly. So I suspect that you've done this cycle in listening to me in the last 20 minutes. You've probably done it 100 times. What's she saying? So how does that fit with what I already know, either my theory or my practice? Now what am I going to do about it? Have you done it? Yes, many times. And so that's the learning process that's going on. You also do it as a team when you're designing a new program or changing a curriculum. You're saying, what's the current curriculum? What's the best practice? What's available for us to do? So what is going to be most useful where we are? Because we can't just bring something from somewhere else and plunk it here. So what changes do we need to do? Now what are we going to do first? You get in the middle of a change process, as you are today. You get in the middle of a change process, and you have to do it too. What did I think was going to happen? What did I expect when I took that act? What did I think was going to happen? So what really did happen? Now what am I going to do? So you end up shifting, almost dancing in the process of change with the adaptive action. And this is the reason that we say nothing is intractable. Because no matter how difficult a problem is, no matter how complex it is, there is always something you can see, some meaning you can make, and some action you can take. Now the trick is to scale the adaptive action so it's something you can do. Because I can take a what that is, well, what? The finance is a mess, the government is a mess, the culture is counter to the work we want to do. We have this history, we have students who are going in another direction. There are lots of ways to describe a messy issue, to take a what that makes you powerless. Hundreds of ways. That's what we call admiring the problem. So the trick is to find a scale that you can influence. What is something you can see? What is something you can understand? And what is a piece of action that you can take? What, so what, now what? And whether it's in your professional medical practice, your health professions practice, whether it's in your teaching, or whether it's in your relationships with your colleagues, and I might say even with your family. What, so what, now what? That's the cycle. So it can also be a very long cycle, long time frame. We're working with a client in the World Health Organization who's doing an intervention for HIV and AIDS in South Africa. And they have a 10-year intervention program that is based on a very large what, so what, now what, for 10 years. And within that, they have annual what, so what, now what plans. And within that, they have monthly plans, and each individual has a different plan. And so each of those feeds into the next. So you can imagine how the system as a whole is working on the problem. It's not that in different ways. And each person is working in a different way. So you can say, yes, social justice is about education. so do education. And social justice is about the economy, so work on the economy. And social justice is about the coherence of the family, so work on the coherence of the family. All of those things are true. All of them are useful, and they're all necessary to move toward the wicked problem. Adaptive action. So the second thing I want to share with you is what we talk about as a finite and infinite game. And this came to be, I began to think about this when I was working with a health organization in British Columbia in Canada. And they were building a new hospital, and it was supposed to be a state-of-the-art, 50 years forward hospital. And they wanted to improve the culture at the same time. So they had a plan to build the building, and they had a plan to change the culture, and they started the project. And a year later, the building was on time, and what do you think was happening with the culture change? Not, right? And so then they went another 6 months, and the building continued to be ready, but they were realizing that the culture change wasn't going to happen. So that was the point at which they called me in. They said, this looks like a wicked problem. And so as I talked with them, this distinction came to be really clear. And what I'd like for you to do is to think about a particular wicked problem that you have. Maybe it's not a really big wicked problem. Maybe it's just a little one that you feel stuck on. Something that's keeping you awake at night. Something that just keeps challenging you that you haven't been able to find a pathway through. So to think about one of those. Everybody have at least one? At least one. That challenges you. And think about the ways that you see finite and infinite in that. So a finite game is like football. Yes, thanks. There's a clear field of play. So if you think about an operating room, there's a clear boundary in the operating room. You know who is sick and who is healing. The sides are really clear. There are some people who can be watching. The rules are the same. So every time you go into a cardiac OR, you're going to have the same kinds of rules that will be in place. Practices. There's expertise, which really counts. There's a score that lets you know whether you win or lose. There's competition often for being best. And the purpose is to win. Now, almost every wicked issue has some finite game work in it. So if you work with competencies, for example, in competency-based education, you can think of competencies as a finite game. There's a boundary. It tells us what we're supposed to do. The rules are there. We're going to check it off. Some people are good. Some people are bad. We can think about competencies as a finite game. If a student wins, they get an A. If they lose, they get an F, and they start over, right? Sometimes we even judge our colleagues in that way. So do you have ideas about how you have finite games in your wicked problem? Wanting to win? On the other side is where most of the wicked issues live, or the reasons that they're wicked. Yes, thanks? In an infinite game, there are either no boundaries, or the boundaries are really fuzzy. You don't know what's in and you don't know what's out. So when you think about moving from acute care in a hospital setting, especially a tertiary care hospital setting, and then delivering care in community, you notice how the boundaries get open and very fuzzy. Rather than having opponents in that process, you have partners. So you can think of the family of the patient as being partners in the work. Not you against them, but you with them in collaboration. Questions become very important, much more important than answers. Because in this complex system, if you're going to engage with the unknown, you got to admit you don't know before you can come to know. So it's questions rather than expertise that move you forward. Everybody is playing. So in some of the work that we're doing in primary care in South Africa, one of our goals is to make sure that when distance education is happening and people are doing their clinical practice in the villages, that they have connections with villages and with villagers and with resources that are there. It may be with the school. It may be with the local medicine person. How do they make the connections with everybody who's there so that everybody can play in the health? And as the physicians are learning to do their clinical practice, they're learning to play as an infinite game. Looking for fit. So because there's not an exact answer, what you're looking for is the closest possible fit. I used to call it good enough. So you want to find whatever's good enough so that you can move forward. I have a client who really hated that. He said, we're not just good enough. We're excellent enough. So I said, okay, excellent enough, we'll go with that. But what you're looking for is, given what you know in this moment and the place where you are and all the data that you can bring together, you're going to take action. But it doesn't end there, because the minute you take action, the system shifts and you have to start over again. So if it wasn't the perfect answer, that's okay. The system will tell you in your next what. So what, now what? So one of the places often that people get stuck in doing adaptive action is they think if they do it once, that's enough. I gathered my data, I made a decision, I took action, I'm done. How often does that work? Like never, yeah? That you have to stay engaged so that you see the consequences of your past action. Each time you learn, you see more the next time. You have a better way to make meaning. You take another action. So that's why relationship is so important. Whether you're talking about teaching, where you have over history, you have cycles of teaching and learning with your students, with your colleagues, you build that kind of belief. With your patients, you do as well. In all of those places, they're infinite games. So you're looking for fit. You're building relationships. You're looking for cooperation. And the purpose is not to win. The purpose is to keep playing, to make sure that the game continues. We use this in a distinction. Oh, by the way, we went then to talk to this group that was building the hospital. And we talked about their culture change as an infinite game. And they realized that the culture change had started long before the hospital was built. In fact, designing the hospital had been part of the culture change. And that as they were building the plan and moving into the plan and imagining what it might look like, and that the culture change would last long after, the process of change would last long after they had moved into the new building. There'd be lots of things that couldn't work until they were there. So they began to see the culture change as the large infinite game within which the building was shifting. Rather than seeing what they'd seen before, there was the building shift with the culture change inside it. Does that make sense? And how much that opens the distinction. Now we're also working in several places with competencies as infinite games. So if you think about, rather the competencies are the box in which we're working, as if it were a finite game keeping us boxed in. And you think instead, no, the competency is the larger infinite game that started before they walked into your door, that will continue long after they leave. And then your teaching is a finite bit in that time. Same thing is true of your patients. Your patients have before, during, and after, and you have a moment. And so it's a way to think about their issues in relationship to your work. It's a very different way to see your wicked problem. Rather than thinking they're coming to me, I must heal them, or I must teach them, or with colleagues, I must get them to do what I want them to do. I'm sure you don't treat interprofessional practice that way. Finite game and infinite game. So think about the wicked problem that you were thinking about, something that keeps you awake at night. What are the finite aspects of it that are and should be checklists? And what are the infinite parts that you need to be actively engaged in inquiry with? So I'd like you just to turn to the person next to you and share with them the way that you see finite and infinite in your own wicked problem. And if the person sitting next to you is your wicked problem, then talk to somebody else. I'll just give you about 3 minutes. another minute? So what are your questions or comments that come up as you look at your wicked problem through this filter? We'll just take a couple or 3 comments. What did you notice? And then if you translate, that would be, you speak in Portuguese, please, and then. Yes, if you'll ask in Portuguese or comment in Portuguese or whatever language you want to use, because mine only is English, I'm sorry. But it's all I've got. But Patrice will. Yeah. Uh-huh. Great. Yeah. So nice. Oh, that's a great example and a way to keep going. So for a person with Down syndrome, it definitely is. How do you keep playing? How do you keep playing? Ah, that's great. That's helpful. Other comments? Yeah. Oh, they love games. That's lovely. When it's done. This was one of the first conversations that we had. I was looking for Brazilian examples of finite and infinite game. And Stuart said, well, what about Carnival? It never ends. And for good and for bad. And there are competitions and neighborhoods have their games and they compete. And so that's within the fact that the Carnival never ends. So good. So you see the distinction. And the reason that it's useful to make this distinction is if you're playing a finite game, it's your job to figure out what are the rules, how do you play, how do you win. That's what you expect from yourself and your students. But if you're playing an infinite game, you expect for your students to be in curiosity, in engagement, discovery, innovating, and learning all the time. And so your expectations that you have for your students will be very different. And you choose which you do. My suspicion is that many places, classroom instruction is teaching a finite game, and clinical practice takes you into the infinite world, right? And so one of the reasons that you have mental health challenges when your students go across that line is that they're still expecting finite outcomes, and you've dumped them into an infinite game, and it's not reasonable. Yeah, Stuart. Is that interesting? Is that what you were talking about? It's a great example. It's a wonderful way to filter out. And there's one last piece that I want to share with you, and I know that it's not one that Stuart has shared with you before. And we got started late, so I'm hoping that we can go until 1:30 and that will work for everyone. Is that okay? It's okay. We're all right. All right. So how do you, when conditions are changing all the time, so it's not that you have a finite game and it stays a finite game forever, or that you have an infinite game, but you move in and out. With your Down students, they have an infection, and then you are thinking about how are they able to do nutrition, and then you're back and forth. So how do you deal with a system that's moving in and out of finite games? And that's what this next tool helps you do. So if you want to do another one. Do you want to move forward? Yeah. Good. It's called the landscape diagram. And it is when you make a decision, any kind of decision, whether it's about education or about health or about working with your colleagues, there are two major variables that determine those. One is how much agreement is there at the beginning. Are you close to agreement? Basically, everybody's kind of in the same place. Or do you begin the decision-making process with everybody far from agreement? Really different decisions. And where you begin will influence how the decision-making process goes. The other variable has to do with the world out there. How certain is it? So if I do A, how certain am I about what B is going to be? So with the infection, high certainty, high agreement. You find out it's strep, you know you're going to give an antibiotic, and they're going to be. So that would be close to certainty, close to agreement. That decision takes no energy. You just say, oh, that's clear, let's go. But sometimes you have decisions to make that are far from agreement and far from certainty. Right? So my niece, who has lived with us but doesn't now, she's 37. She went to the hospital, had a really bad headache. Everything was fine except her hormones were out, were really weird. So they did a blood sugar test, and her blood sugar was really weird. They didn't know what was going on. It was very weird. And so she left that day with her headache gone, but far from understanding about what the next step was going to be. No certainty, no agreement. Every health professional who came in to see her said something different. No agreement. And so she was there. So I talked with them last night, and she had been to a specialist who has other tests to do, and so he's moving, helping her move toward more certainty and more agreement, but there's still not a real answer. And so there's some things that are clear, some things that are not clear, and so her physician is working in this space in a really complex way. Now we divide this space into three parts, so if we can have another one. So the first part is down here in the close to agreement, close to certainty, stable. So that's where things like policies go, procedures go. Very clear. The scientific information that you learn, classwork, goes in the stable space. It's very clear to see if it's right or wrong. This is where finite games live. And you know, as teachers, there's some things that are either going to be right or wrong, and you know it right off the bat. Social accountability is not one of those, right? Stable. The other extreme is unstable. In the middle, we have emergent. So this is a place where there's some structure, but it's not totally structured. There's some agreement, but everybody doesn't quite agree. So if you do problem-based learning, if you do team-based learning, you're here, there's some things in the problem that are pretty close to certainty. And at the same time, if it's an interesting problem, there are things that are not close. And if you have a team where everybody agrees, then it's just boring. Nobody's going to learn anything, right? So you want a team where there's some disagreement so that there's lively interaction. And so you want your teams to stay in the emergent space. Now that means sometimes they'll visit the stable space. Sometimes, unfortunately, they'll visit the unstable space. So if you want to do another one. So the unstable space is where you can't really know what's going on. You don't see a pattern. You're watching. When you're in what? Your what is like, what in the world is going on? What is all this? What? And the so what is, I need to get some more data. I need to make some connections. I need to talk to somebody else. And then I do that. And then bit by bit, things become more certain. They become clearer. And I come to agreement. Sometimes I even disagree with myself. And I'm moving then into an emergent space. Then when it becomes really clear, I can do exactly what needs to be done. And there can still be some things that are in question. So we can move from one part of this to another. And if you think about when a student comes to you and you first meet them, you don't really know how quickly they'll learn, how ready they are to learn. Don't know. Every student who comes to you in an unstable space, far from agreement, far from certainty. Every conversation helps you move closer to a place as a teacher that you understand where they are and you can help them move forward. And by the time they leave, you may be reading their minds in stable space, or maybe not. Maybe they're reading yours, which would be a little different. So there are two other things I want to share with you about this, but are there any questions about the diagram itself and how it relates to decision making? Can you think about your own sticky issue, the one you talked about a minute ago, finite infinite? Ask yourself, where is it now? Is it sticky because it's down in stable space and you want to move it? Or is it sticky because it's unstable and very ambiguous and confusing? Or is it sticky because you're in emergent space and you're just going around and around in circles but not being able to get anywhere? Where is it now? Where would you like it to be? If it were solved or if it were better, would you want it to be more stable or would you want it to be less stable? And how are you going to get there? So those are the three steps. If you would please, yep. So where are you now? In the examples that you thought about, where would you put, just to put a little mark? And for each, so my colleague and sister Royce says, none of them is naughty and none of them is nice. No naughty or nice. They're all good. So there's sometimes when you want stable space, when there's risk, when there's danger, when there's clarity, when you know the answer, when it's something that somebody has done before and you've done it yourself, it's a great place to be. It's nice and secure, it's safe. But what are the risks of being unstable? What are the dangers if you go to stable and don't get out? I'm sure none of you do this, but I have known instructors who it didn't matter what the student was doing, the instructor would say the same thing. No matter what the nail is, everything is a hammer. While you have a hammer, everything is a nail. You just do the same things over and over and over without opening the possibility for a shift. In fact, I find myself doing that. What are the risks and benefits? Now, in the emergent, it's really great because you can create new things. But you can also get stuck there. So you're going around in circles. It's exhausting. Takes a lot of energy. Many of the interdisciplinary practices that we work with get stuck in emergent. So you have some agreement, you have some certainty, let's have another conversation. Let's have another conversation, let's have another conversation, and then another one. And then after about 6 months, everybody's tired and they quit. Rather than saying, okay, how can we move this conversation into something practical, find a now what in it, or get some more data, go into unstable space so that we come back again. So you can get stuck there. So it can be very generative or not. So if you think about an interdisciplinary practice that you're related to, by the way, you can use this to think about your family too. So, so you may want to think, if you have a teenage child, you can think about where they might be. Or if you're falling in love, you can think about what that looks like. Assessment systems are great. Stuart, do you want to talk a little bit about what assessment would look like here? Here, take the mic, though. Thank you. I don't think it's on. Yeah, the mic isn't on. There you go. And we want it so that people who are listening can hear. There you go.
Multiple choice question.
Oh, good.
One right answer, stable. An OSCE. You'll pass or fail. You could have different checks, but you have to pass. A clinical observation with a resident, you want to see them be adaptive in the moment. And you want to see how they deal with uncertainty. So you're moving this way. And every student is different. And then if you want a school system of assessment, you need all of it.
Yeah, good, thank you. Does that make sense? And how if you get stuck in any one, you won't be able to do the job. They're all good and they're all bad. You need to be able to match, fit, or function. Where are you now? Where do you need to be? How do you get there? And to think about leadership. So what does a leader do in stable space? If you're leading something that's stable and should be, what would a leader do? Louder. Thinking is good. Yeah, so they'd make rules, they'd make it really clear, they'd be top-down, powerful, they'd be in charge. If a leader's in the emergent space, what would they be doing? They'd be looking at what's happening, doing adaptive action very actively. What are the possibilities that we can view? What is a path forward? What won't? They're also leaders in unstable space. If you're leading and the system is just crazy, what should you do as a leader in that space? Calm down, right? So calm down and help other people calm down. Yeah? So, what? Yes, you're good, that's true. So Patricia, when we were out in the hall getting ready to come in, she says, just breathe. Yeah, just breathe. The other thing that's really important for leaders in the unstable is sense of humor, right? That's right. So to be able to laugh at yourself and everybody else at least builds the agreement, even if you can't build the certainty. Oh, yes. Yeah. Optimism, absolutely. Because it's easy to get pessimistic out there, isn't it? But if you can, when it's unstable, and your what are the possibilities in this space? And the so what is, how can I build on those possibilities, and the now what is building on them, then the optimism grows over time. If your what is, what's the matter? What's wrong? What's the problem? And the so what is, we can understand the problem and talk about the problem, and then we're going to do something about the problem. And that spiral is just downward, downward. Yeah, good. Good example. Other examples? So let's talk a little bit about what you can do. So this is a way to do what and so what very easily. Let's talk about some now what. So if you want to go to the next one. And the next one, I think it's probably a couple. Yeah. So these are the 3 steps. Another one. Good, thanks. So when we think about adaptive action on the landscape, it kind of translates. So what becomes, where are you now? So what becomes, so where do you want to be? And now what becomes, what are you going to do to get there? So it's adaptive action, and once you move, you're somewhere, and then you have to move again. Now, we often talk about resilience on the landscape. So what does it mean to be resilient when you're in a space that's shifting all the time? And we did a research project in Finland with trying to define resilience for individuals and for organizations and for the community. And so we looked at 9 different organizations, from a 1-person consulting firm to the largest nuclear power plant. And we were looking across all those different ones. They were all resilient organizations. We were trying to figure out what made them resilient. Everyone was different. They were working in different environments. They were dealing with different things. And what we realized was there was a circle on the diagram, or an elongated space, that their environments demanded. And they were able to work in that space, and that's why they were resilient. So in the nuclear power plant, you can imagine that their circle was down close to the stable space. And that when we were working with a group that was a marketing company, a 5-person marketing company, they dwelt out there. So the trick to being resilient was to know what the environment needed in a moment, to have the capacity to work in that space, and to move around in it, in and out of it. That's how we defined resilience in that project. So think about that with your budding health professionals. So when you think about getting a physician ready to practice out in the world, isn't that what you want for him or her? You want him or her to be able to recognize all of these parts, be able to work in all of them, and to know when to be where, even if they can't know the right answer. This is what you do instead of the right answer when the right answer is not possible to question you. So, next. So this is what you do when if you've done the what, where are you now, what are you going to do? Anytime you increase constraints in the system, you'll shift it toward greater agreement and certainty. It will calm down. So increasing constraints. Now that can be shortening the time, making the space smaller, making the requirements tighter, focusing in on a single competency, making just a small group rather than a large group of people. Any of those constrain the space and will tend to make it more stable. So if you feel like in a classroom or with a patient, this may go back to the mental health issues with students. We'll think about that. But if you're aware that things are just too crazy and too uncomfortable and you want to stabilize it, think about what you can constrain to help the system slow down. It may be time, it may be space, it may be language, it may be vocabulary, it may be changing the subject, thinking about something else. How do you make it smaller? Tighter, because tighter means more stable. On the other hand, now you can do the other one. You can guess what you do to move it the other direction. You decrease constraints. So you add more differences, get more perspectives, open up the space, make it a longer time period, make it a more diverse activity. Put them out in the community and not just in the operating room. And opening up the constraints then will make the system grow out. Now, what we realize from complex systems is that as they develop, as they grow, as they build resilience, they move towards stability and away from stability. Towards stability and away. It's respiration. I mean, you guys know more about that than I do, right? So this is how healthy systems transform. They expand, and then they contract. And they expand, and they contract. And you can see it in your students, right? So your students think they know. They come to you at the beginning of clinical practice, let's say. They know everything. And then they have their first shift in clinical work. And suddenly they think they know nothing. And then they figure out something. And then they get surprised again. And then they figure out something else. And that process for good medical professionals, health professionals, will continue after they leave school. They will continue in their professional practices, learning more, figuring it out, asking questions, figuring it out, running into something new, figuring it out. We call that stretch and fold. And that is the process of change in complex systems. It's not, here's A, there's B, go. No, it's and the reason that I think this may link to the mental health of your students is that when they are breathing in and getting more and more and more, there's a kind of anxiety that comes when you stretch them too far. They just are feeling too stretched and anxious. And then there's another kind of discomfort that comes when they've squeezed in and you're not giving them any choices, and it's right before time, right? And so it's uncomfortable to be constrained, too constrained, and it's uncomfortable to be too unconstrained. But if they're going to learn, they've got to be both, off and on. And so if you can help them see that they're uncomfortable because they're feeling so tight, and just help them recognize that. And, or, you know they're in a place that they're feeling really stretched. What can you do about that? And recognize that what you're doing, whether you're healing, or whether you're teaching, or whether you're leading, or whether you're collaborating, that this is what you're doing. You are stretching and folding, setting conditions for others to stretch and fold so that you can move around with ease and grace on this pattern, this system. I'll pause again for questions or comments. Are you feeling really stretched? Ready to fold a little bit? We haven't talked much about curriculum design, but this is also applicable in curriculum design. So if you think about creating a program, and what are the points in the program that you are really going to challenge them to pieces, and what are the points in the program that you're going to let them build the confidence of finding a place and a time. And you can use this then to build a curriculum that will be most useful and balanced for the work they do and the places they go. Thanks, yeah. We're about finished here. So, what do you do when you don't know what to do? What do you do when you're working in a wicked space, when there are no right answers that you can reach? You pay attention to the dynamics of the human systems, and you do that through adaptive action, what, so what, now what. You do that by seeing finite and infinite games and playing each in the right time. And you do that by thinking about the landscape diagram. Where are you now? Where do you need to be? How are you going to get there? Another one, please, thanks, yeah. So, where can you learn more? One more. So these are sources, resources that you can use, that you can access, and I'll be happy to send you the slides, Patricia, so that you can use them, share them. So I know some of you have been taking pictures, but we'll send you the slides. We have a very simple intellectual property policy. If you learn something from us, it belongs to you. That's pretty simple, right? Because we think the important thing is that people use this work, not that we get rich and famous for it. We have two requests. One is that you cite your source so people can get more information if they want it. And the second is, if you use this in a novel way, a new way, and you learn something, that you teach it back to us. So my email address is on the front, because we, as a field of human systems dynamics, are a learning process. And so every time we meet someone new, we expand. And when we share back and learn from each other, then we contract. And so I am very appreciative and thankful for all of you for coming to help us stretch and fold today. And I hope that you find this useful. and the other sources. So one more. Another one. Oh, it's supposed to say obrigada. Obrigada. That's what it's supposed to say. Thank you.